What is going on, y'all? KMBest here. Agamotto has been running wild on Marvel Snap's ladder. Let's take a look at what this card is, what this card does, and the roles it plays in the metagame and in the decks that I think it's good in. Spoiler alert, I do like the card. Agamotto is a 5/10 with a game start ability reminiscent of Thanos's, frankly. Where Thanos is shuffling the Infinity Stones into your deck, Agamotto is shuffling 4 Ancient Arcana. There's one that costs 1, one that costs 2, one that costs 3, and one that costs 4. Each of these Arcana do not stay on the board when you cast them. You cast them and then they are banished. They, in addition, cannot be Alioth, but they can be Cosmoed. The first of them is Temporal Manipulation, which costs 1, draws your Agamotto, and gives him +3 power. This is, in my opinion, the actual best of these spells, unless you already have Agamotto in your hand, in which case it is the worst. Winds of Watoomb is an effective 2/5 with some clog upside. It is a 2 energy spell with a -5 afflict to one of your opponent's cards at the location you play Winds of Watoomb, and it moves it to the right. This is, on its face, the most, I guess you'd say, ridiculous on rate of the cards, because it doesn't require really any setup to be good. It is just pretty much always going to be a 2/5 that doesn't take up space and could clog your opponent, which is a very valuable thing to have. Bolts of Balthak, which, as always, I am legally obligated to note, sounds like Mike Tyson is punching you in the unmentionables, is a 3 energy spell that adds 4 energy next turn. It is quite powerful to play later in the game, and I do like that there is tension between playing bolts on turn 5 and actually getting your Agamotto out there, as he is very often the biggest 5-drop in your deck. Images of Ikon is the thing that rewards you the most for putting this card in your deck. All of the other stuff is just like, oh, that's good, that's good, that's good. It doesn't require a ton of work. There's a little bit of tension between the cards in your hand, but not too much. Images of Ikon is effectively like a small version of Bar Sinister. It turns all your units at a location into the biggest unit at that location. This is a thing that I have used to get multiple Agamottos. This is a thing that I have used to get multiple Antivenoms, multiple Wiccans. It's a thing that does a lot of powerful stuff, and it is sort of the big finisher of a lot of Agamotto decks. It is uniquely positioned to be a dangerous card, and it makes turn 6s a very dangerous thing when this card is potentially available. There's also some additional synergy where, like, if you ever get this off of an Antivenom, it is one of the most ridiculous things that you have ever seen in your entire life. So, Agamotto has a lot to live up to. I don't necessarily need to list the previous season passes, but I do think it's instructive to consider, let's say, the last 5. We have Sam Wilson, who was and is arguably the best card in the game. We have Iron Patriot, who was and is one of the best cards in the game. We have Galacta, who was and is one of the best cards in the game. We have Surtur, who has been nerfed since he came out like 3 or 4 different times already. And we have Agent Venom, who in my opinion was the strongest of all of these cards at his peak. And I think that that shows the level of competition that a Season Pass card coming out has to reach. I feel as though Agamotto is a powerful addition to a fairly strict and specific type of deck. And what I mean by that is this is a card that gives your random mid-range pile additional verticality in a very powerful way. It is not like you're going to go into things looking to build an Agamotto deck. It is that you are going to play him as a method of using Images of Ikon, his own very large body, and other spells as a way of just having bigger numbers in your deck. And the reason this is important, right now at least, is because Hela is a deck that is basically just stat checking every mid-range deck. Agamotto is allowing you to pass the stat check more than any other card was previously allowing you to do that. What I don't think he is fully solved. And I think that that is really very much worth talking about, because this is a card that right now is sort of slotting into things that are already good. And I do think it's entirely possible that in other metagames, we don't want this additional verticality. The power is important and it is useful, but it has some knock-on effects that it is possible that maybe we want to go lower to the ground with our mid-range decks. Right now, we definitely do not want to go lower to the ground. We want to be as tall as we possibly can, because that is what this guy enables us to do, and because that is what the metagame writ large is asking for. There's also an additional weird effect that I noticed as I played my way up to and in Infinite, which is everyone seems to really enjoy playing this card, and that has shifted the meta, whether or not the meta has deserved to shift or not. Right now, I am very certain that Hela is still a very powerful deck, but I am seeing less of it than I should. And the same applies to things like Mr. Negative. This is the kind of thing where even though he helps in those matchups, he's not making your mid-range deck beat them all, or even, I would say, most of the time. He just helps you make it less helpless a decent amount of the time. You don't have to instantly retreat when you're playing a Scream deck and your opponent discards a Black Cat on turn 1. This is a valuable thing, but I do think that it is sort of artificially making him look a little bit better. People are not building to beat him, they're still building to play him. And I think that that means that he could get a little bit misleadingly regarded as something that is a little better than he is. I do think he's very good. I do think he has a very important role to play in the current metagame. I think that on the whole, I have enjoyed playing him, and he has a lot of power in his kit in a way that many other cards simply do not. I do think that it is likely that this will be a worthwhile purchase on the Season Pass, if only for the uniqueness, but I do have high hopes for long-term strength from Agamotto. With all of that said, let's jump into the decks. This was the first Agamotto list that I started with. It is a powerful Thanos list, and I think Thanos is like exactly the kind of thing that I want to be doing in a world where I have to sort of hedge for Hela. Because where other mid-range decks, again, we've talked about the mid-range matchup with Hela, we've talked about the mid-range matchup with Negative. When you are playing Thanos, you always have, I guess, what I would describe as a high roller's chance. Whether that be against a Mr. Negative deck with your Reality Stone, whether that be with Eliath, whether that be with massive amounts of points off of Iron Patriot and Agamotto, whether you clog them up with the Winds of Watoomb, all sorts of stuff you can do. And the reason I think that's valuable is because there are a lot of mid-range decks, and maybe they'll start rethinking this the more Agamottos there are in here, but there's a lot of mid-range decks right now that just get flat bullied when your opponent does like a discard Black Cat play or like the Mr. Negative, even a late Mr. Negative. And so having the ability to put that fear into them, I think really does matter. What Thanos has is a plethora of tools. And I think that those tools are things that Agamotto can help optimize and bring to bear in powerful ways. This is a deck that I would consider a toolbox deck. It does a bunch of different stuff. It has various cards that are good for various things, and it's not always going to play all of its cards. It's a reasonable, but not necessarily overpowering deck. There are two cards in here that are being played, in my opinion, pretty specifically because of Agamotto. The first one is Gorgon, who has gained additional prominence as so many people have been playing Agamotto with Thanos, Agamotto with Arishem, Agamotto with whatever. Just making sure that those spell cards cost a little bit more, and you're also like 50% of the time probably hitting some of the other cards in their deck as well, because maybe they're not playing Thanos or Arishem, but at least one of the decks I'm about to show you is a Victoria hand deck, so it just has a lot of general application right now. The other card is Shang-Chi. Because Agamotto is a 5/13 a lot of the time, there's just kind of a lot of like playing a guy that dies to Shang that happens right now. That was originally a Super Skrull in Crazy's build. This is his Thanos build that I yoinked and changed one card in. And that is sort of where I'm at on it, where it was like, we were trying the Super Skrull, it's just not worth it. Shang is so required for all of the Agamotto stuff that is happening right now. So between Gorgon and Shang-Chi, we actually have a pretty good matchup into other Agamotto decks because we have all of this tech. We have the ability to be the tallest mid-range deck by virtue of stuff like Mockingbird, and we have the ability to just randomly shut people down with Alioth stuff. This is sort of the pitch for Thanos right now. V-Hand Agamotto was popularized by a member of the official Marvel Snap Discord named Dababu, who, I mean, I'm a big fan of the official Marvel Snap Discord. I know a lot of people watching this are not, but I always like to give shout outs to people from the official Discord when I can, just because I am, as a content creator, in some ways a product of it. When I first started making Marvel Snap content, it was like paste bin guides for the Discord, basically. And so I always like to see that like there are still things happening there. So this is not exactly his list, unfortunately. There are basically 3 flex slots here, in my opinion. Zabu can be Nico Minoru. Of course, you also have the Shadow King, which can be Juggernaut, or really whatever you want it to be. And of course, Gwenpool, who I had as Anti-Venom for a while. I've been switching back and forth here. I genuinely could not tell you what exactly the optimal things are for those 3 slots. My guess is that some combination of, like, if you go back to the Anti-Venom and then you put a Nico in, that would probably be where my head is at. But one of the cards that's worth talking about in the context of Agamotto is Gwenpool. Having an Images of Ikon on Gwenpool is really, 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 really powerful. And being able to do something like that, it's another way to give the deck verticality. It's not just, oh, I'm cloning my Agamotto, it's, oh, I've got 75 Gwenpool procs too. I've got 18 power in that lane and a bunch in my hand. I opted for that, although honestly, I feel as though I had better results with Anti-Venom in the deck. The other way of getting to verticality here is with Werewolf by Night, who is taking a little bit of splash damage here because of the aforementioned Shang-Chi upside that is happening so much recently. Now, there is a lot of Shang-Chi and you're going to have to be aware of it, but in matchups against those stack-up tall combo decks, Werewolf by Night can be one of your ways of getting tall enough to actually win 2 lanes against something like Hela. One of the interesting things about Werewolf by Night is that since the spells banish themselves, they go away, what you can do is play Werewolf by Night and then fill up a lane with a spell. Werewolf by Night will then go to where the spell was and then pull it off. You have a lot of interesting ability to make Werewolf by Night better. Also, for those wondering, no, I still have not gotten the Marshmallow Werewolf by Night in my, whatever, the vault. I have not gotten it. It's the only variant I want from the vault. It is not there. Now I think you'll start to see a little bit of a pattern, and that pattern is sort of, you know, explicitly called out in the name of this deck, which is literally just put them in mid-range decks. If you're doing like whatever mid-rangey, whatever it is, if you're like a deck that has a terrible matchup to Hela and you just want a chance at high rolling out of it, if you're a deck that's playing like a bunch of tech cards that just like gets rocked by that stuff, if you're anything even resembling the kind of deck that just gets outpointed by Hela, this is sort of where he's going right now. It might be a temporary thing, but it does seem like a reasonable role assignment for him. He is the card that raises the ceiling of all of these decks. We have the same dynamics going on here with the Images of Ikon on Galacta, on Gwenpool. These are decks that are very good at using the extra energy from Bolts of Balthak. These are decks that really enjoy having a 5/13 and drawing a card. These are the kind of decks that you're going to be seeing a lot of Agamotto in until we figure out exactly what else he can do. Right now, the thing I'm sure he can do is raise the ceiling of decks like this. What the real question is can he do other stuff, or is that his role? No, seriously, just put him in your mid-range decks. One of the things that is, I consider, fairly likely to happen is if people stop playing Hela because they're experimenting with Agamotto, and everyone is playing all of these, like, Agamotto decks. If everyone's playing Agamotto mid-range, I kind of think Scream might be the one that comes out on top, where all these people are playing Agamotto mid-range decks. Yeah, there's the Thanos one with the Shang-Chi and the Gorgon, but it's like, this is the kind of mid-range deck that is phenomenally powerful against other mid-range decks. It is excellent at being an Iron Patriot deck. It does its points incredibly powerfully. It is a deck that has slightly more in terms of good 2-drop density, thanks to Scream and the Kraven. There's just a lot of power in here, and my instinct is that if everyone stops caring about and or respecting Hela, or if a deck like this is able to meaningfully compete with such a deck, which I am less than sure of, but Agamotto helps, then you are going to end up in a fairly similar metagame to the one we were in previously, where the mid-range decks are just trying to out-mid-range each other, and Scream is the best mid-range scaler in the game. Like, just straight up, scaling for 4 is a very powerful thing to do. Again, the pattern should be clear to you by now. This is yet another mid-rangey tech deck that gets absolutely obliterated by Hela, using Agamotto in order to raise the ceiling high enough, hopefully, to actually deal with that. There is a spot being dedicated to Gorgon here that could be dedicated to Fenris Wolf if you decided to respect Hela more. You can additionally also try to get tech for other things in there, but the main thing I'm trying to get at here, the main point I'm trying to make, is that there are some very specific synergies with this card, A. B, his main role is taking mid-range decks and putting them over the top of some combo decks, and C, hopefully that will allow those decks to grow and change and start teching against other things. That Gorgon is extremely temporary. If people are not playing Agamotto where you're at and you want to beat Hela, get a Fenris Wolf in there as fast as possible. This is yet another deck that is using the Gwenpool Images of Ikon thing. This is yet another deck that is trying to explode with a bunch of power and interaction on the final turn of the game, which means it has great synergy with Bolts of Balthak. There are 0 decks that have no synergy with the first 2 spells, and I think you're starting to see a pattern. What this guy does is sort of serve as like half Sarah, half giant dude. That's really what Agamotto's role is. Between Bolts of Balthak and Images of Ikon, he's just like half an energy cheat machine and half a really big guy. And that goes in a lot of mid-range decks, but it doesn't necessarily lend itself to a wide range of playstyles. Another problem with this is that it really wants Sam Wilson. You're an Images of Ikon deck. You want stuff on the board. And so having that Sam Wilson in your deck is actually pretty crucial to a lot of this stuff. And that's sort of the problem that I see for Agamotto. I think he's very good, but it's also like, if you actually look at these decks, they are just like pure good cards piles, and that is a lot of the most recent season passes, especially Sam Wilson. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching that video. I do want to take a little bit of time to talk about Agamotto as a card, the sort of confluence of season pass cards that we have seen recently, and the general way in which this stuff can be regarded as pay to win. My instinct is that Agamotto is maybe not going to get out of the niche that I've painstakingly described over the course of this video. He is a card to do this specific thing. And a lot of that is because of just how he plays. There's no deck that is going to be like sad about having the 1-cost spell and the 2-cost spell. But when you get to the 3-cost spell, there are going to be certain decks that vastly prefer having a bunch of energy on the final turn, and those decks tend to be mid-rangey Sarah type decks, right? Then there are also going to be certain decks that vastly prefer having the ability to go vertical with Images of Ikon, and those are overwhelmingly going to be decks that have a need to go vertical in the metagame, and that is where the other mid-range decks come in because of things like Hela, because of things like Mr. Negative some of the time, although frankly I think you still need more tech for that. He's not solving that matchup on his own, although he does help. So you end up with a card that I think a lot of people are going to look at this and be like, wow, this is really wacky and wild and weird. And then when they actually play it, what they'll realize is he's just like a good on-rate dork that you slap in your decks. And I do think that right now, people haven't fully reckoned with the genuine actual cost of having spells in your deck and how inconsistent it can make you. He is a card that will stress your ability to retreat. I was actually very proud of myself on the climb that I wasn't cope staying my unplayable hands, because they definitely did happen. There is an amount of just like, well, Agamotto stuff is in my deck and I'm drawing a bunch of garbage. That'll happen a lot. It's a real thing. And so I think I'd really like to see a little bit more data. I'd like to see this built out a little bit more, figure out whether or not he actually makes sense in these shells. I think contextually in the metagame, he makes a ton of sense in these shells right now. I do not know if that's a permanent thing. I think if you made me ballpark it, and I realize I'm setting myself up to have this clipped and then slowed down and then played in black and white repeatedly at the beginning of a video where I'm like, I'm an idiot. I think if you looked at the last 6 season passes, including him, from Agent Venom onward, I would guess that he is bottom half of those. That is high competition, but it is the competition he's actually competing against. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching the video. I've been KMBest. You have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.